Hey folks, this is Rhykker with a Diablo 3 patch 2.6 Necromancer build video. It's seeming like we can be roughly a month away from the release of the Necromancer and Season 11. And so I just wanted to showcase what I found to be a really cool and fun and interesting build that itemizes differently than any other build. In fact, you're going to see me talk about a legendary gem that I have never ever spoken about in any video ever before. Currently, there seem to be two viable Necromancer builds. One is Rothma's, the pet build, and another is Inarius, the bonestorm build. Unfortunately, Rothma's has this broken combination in which it can be invulnerable 100% of the time, and I'm hoping that that will be patched out. And I'm hoping that the bonestorm build that we're showing right now will not be nerfed. As of a couple days ago, the Necromancer was pulled from beta. This could be for more reworks, as this happened in the past. So I wasn't able to record new footage of a Greater Rift run. What you're seeing is actually taken from one of my streams on Monday. This is an 84 Greater Rift that we're doing with this bonestorm build. I could have gone higher than that. I've seen this build do in the low 90s. And it could potentially push higher. Unfortunately, the broken Rothma's build was kind of skewing our ability to test because more people are testing the broken build. But for now, we'll give an overview of this bonestorm build. Again, it's really fun, I really like it, and it's very strong, plays well, feels good, and let's give an overview here. So, it is the Grace of Inarius set. It buffs your bone armor damage. The core of its toughness comes from the 4-piece bonus, whereby every stack of bone armor gives you 2% damage reduction. So, under normal circumstances, you can have 10 stacks for 50% damage reduction. In this particular variant, because we've seen some variants of the bonestorm build, we're going to have 15 stacks for 75% damage reduction. And you might be wondering, how does the math add up on that? I forgot to mention that bone armor natively gives you 3% damage reduction per stack, so this is giving an additional 2% per stack for a total of 5% damage reduction per stack. My math isn't that bad, okay? And then we have the 6-piece bonus, and this is what makes this build so interesting, both visually, well, more than both, visually, from a playstyle, from a gearing perspective. Everything about this is awesome, and I really hope Blizzard doesn't change this. So typically when you cast bone armor, it looks like literally bone armor covering up your character, and some people like the look of that, some people don't. With this set, the 6-piece bonus, instead of the armor being on you, it flies around you like a swirling bone NATO. It's sort of a mixture between the Diablo 2 bone armor and the Diablo 2 druid twister, tornado, whatever that tornado that follows them around. Hurricane, I think. Anyway, this effect damages enemies, but also causes them to take more damage from the Necromancer. And this is what's so interesting about this. This is unlike any other buff. The wording is very precise. It's not saying these skills deal more damage. It's not saying all Necromancer skills deal more damage. It's saying that enemies take more damage from the Necromancer, regardless of where that damage is coming from. Suddenly, things that were not appreciable sources of damage can become significant with this build. And that's where our legendary gems will come into play. More on that in a bit. So apart from the base set, we're also going to be using some items for toughness. This is a melee build, you're in the thick of things, so you're really going to want to bring your toughness up, and you can get it quite high, easily 500 million toughness, even higher than that. Dainty's binding buff, you gain 50% damage reduction if there's an enemy afflicted by your Decrepify. We can maintain 100% uptime on that. For our bracers, we got Ancient Parthan Defenders. This is a negotiable slot. You can go with Nemesis bracers, for instance. Ancient Parthans are helpful, but they're not necessary. This is just more damage reduction, and you'll notice, in fact, that we are not rolling with an elemental damage on this. Now, as we get closer to Necromancer release, I'll likely release a full build guide on this build, assuming it's still viable, in which we give the full breakdown of everything, because we still have to optimize it. It's still in its infancy. But right now, this might be the first or one of the few builds that doesn't necessarily need elemental damage, and we'll explain why soon. We're throwing in a Traveler's Pledge and a Compass Rose combo. That's for more toughness and damage whenever we need it. For our weapon, we're going with Rylina's Shadow Hook. Between that and Tragul's Corroded Fang, those are the two important items here, and you could potentially be wielding the one-handed one, Tragul's. The only reason really that we're not going with an offhand here is that there's no offhand that really benefits this build. There's no offhand that has a power that's super significant to us. So if you do want to go with a one-hander and an offhand, you're just going for pure damage. You just want to get the highest stats possible to maximize your damage. Again, it's not super clear right now whether a two-hander is the better option over a one-hander and an offhand. But what is core is having these two items. And to start with, Rylina's Shadow Hook makes you deal more damage for every point of max essence that you have. We don't really care about bone spikes because we're not going to be running out of essence. Then with Traggl's Corroded Fang, the Cursed Scythe rune for Grim Scythe now has a 100% chance to apply a curse, and you deal more damage against cursed enemies. Typically, Cursed Scythe on Grim Scythe only gives a 15% chance to apply a random curse. Now it's a 100% chance, so you're always applying the curses. Also in our cube, we'll want an Aquila Cuirass. Again, we're not really using up very much resource, so we'll always be able to maintain that 50% damage reduction. Again, this is a huge toughness build. For your jewelry cube slot, you'll either want a Wisdom of Kalan or a Unity. If you're running multiplayer, if you're running with a group, then definitely not a Unity. But otherwise, the damage reduction conferred from the Wisdom of Kalan and the Unity turns out to be the same, the way multiplicative damage reduction works. You see, if damage reduction stacked additively, then 50% damage reduction plus 50% damage reduction would mean 100% damage reduction, which doesn't make sense, obviously. When we stack these multiplicatively instead, then 50% plus 50% equals 75% damage reduction. So you may then wonder, well, what's better, having a Unity, which is another 50% damage reduction, or is it better to buff one of our 50% damage reductions into a 75%, which is what happens with the Wisdom of Kalan. And as it turns out, the math works out that they're exactly the same. Going from 50 to 75% damage reduction on one source is equivalent to adding an additional 50%. So what it then comes down to really is itemization. Because the other important piece of jewelry that we want is Crispin's Sentence. And if you don't have a near perfect roll, I have a 99 out of a possible 100. If you have a poor roll, then you might want to instead extract your Crispins, in which case you would want to be wearing a Unity, since you're not going to want to swap out your Traveler's Pledge. So, you can't afford to wear a Wisdom of Kalan. But going back to this Crispins here, this is making us deal a bunch more damage to control impaired enemies. And this damage buff actually works out to be even better than a convention of elements. So that's our itemization overview. We'll take a look at the skills now before we come back to the legendary gems. We've already covered Grim Scythe. You're going to be using this all the time to apply curses, as well as this is our main attack power. Again, this is being buffed by our 6-piece bonus, but there will be more. Then we have Bone Armor Dislocation. In addition to giving us armor, the Dislocation rune makes the skill stun enemies. Next, we're running with Corpse Lance Brittle Touch. So Corpse Lance is a skill that already deals a lot of damage. Now being buffed by the 6-piece, that's going to be even more considerable. Corpse Lance is a skill that uses up a corpse on the ground to basically rip out their bones and shoot them as spears, or lances. What the Brittle Touch rune does is every time an enemy is hit by a Corpse Lance, their chance to be critically hit is increased by 5% for 5 seconds. That's every time they're hit. So not only does this do a lot of damage in and of itself, it also gives us a stacking damage buff. Next we have Land of the Dead Frozen Lands. So Land of the Dead on a 2-minute cooldown allows you to use corpse skills like Corpse Lance for free, so you can just keep spamming it. This is what you want to keep for your big fights. The Frozen Lands rune applies a really strong freeze crowd control effect while in Land of the Dead. Next we'll want Decrepify Dizzying Curse. Now, while we are constantly applying all of our curses to enemies thanks to our Grim Scythe and Traggl's Corroded Fang combo, you're not applying the runes. So, selecting a curse here is what allows us to apply a rune. Also, going with Decrepify allows us to more easily maintain our Dainty's Binding damage reduction buff. We can cast it before actually getting into combat. Now, instead of Decrepify, you tend to see people running with Frailty, Aura of Frailty. Basically, that means that anyone that comes within range of you will die once they drop below 15% health. This is a very considerable source of damage. But our clan member Black Cat argues that you actually gain more damage, more effective damage, by using the Dizzying Curse rune on Decrepify. You see, Decrepify, without the rune, slows enemies and reduces their damage. The Dizzying Curse rune gives them a 10% chance to be stunned for 2 seconds, and when an enemy is stunned, you're dealing triple damage, quadruple damage with Crisbins. He argues that this buff is more beneficial than the Aura of Frailty. Then lastly, we have Blood Rush Potency. Blood Rush is our mobility power, and Potency doubles our armor for a few seconds, 2 seconds specifically, after using it. As for our skills, we have Overwhelming Essence. This increases our essence, which gives us a nice damage buff thanks to Rylena's Shadow Hook. Then we have Blood is Power. In essence, this gives us cooldown the more damage we take. This will help us pop Land of the Dead more often. Next we have Stand Alone, which basically doubles our armor. And lastly we have Spreading Malediction, which gives you a 1% damage bonus for every enemy hit by one of your curses. Being able to cast Decrepify at a distance will also aid us in applying Spreading Malediction to as many enemies as possible. So as it stands right now, we have an okay build. It's not great, but it's not terrible. It has a lot of toughness, which is fantastic, but it's lacking a little bit in damage. That 6-piece damage bonus, it is significant. But right now, what's our main attack? It's Grim Scythe, which in and of itself is not a very powerful skill. Yes, we occasionally get to cast Corpse Lance, which is nice, but outside of Land of the Dead, it's just not happening fast enough. So let's take a look at our gems. We're using Bane of the Trapped. As always, this is arguably the best gem in the game. This synergizes with our Crisbins and gives us a flat damage buff to all enemies that we're hitting. And then our next gem, we're going to use a Pain Enhancer. This causes a bleed effect. In some builds, you sometimes see Pain Enhancers. It's generally to gain the Blood Frenzy, but in this case, we gotta remember that this bleed effect is actually being buffed by our 6-piece bonus. So all of a sudden, this bleed effect's damage is becoming a bit more considerable. Yes, it's spread over 3 seconds, but if you get your gem high enough level, then anytime you're critting, which should be roughly half the time, you're dealing some decent damage. It won't be as considerable as your Corpse Lance, but it will be more damage than just your Scythe. But then the real damage source comes in our final gem, Myrinae, Teardrop of the Starweaver. And this is the big surprise, and this is what has me so excited about this build. 15% chance on hit to smite a nearby enemy for a bunch of damage, and heal yourself as well. So first off, it's automatically smiting a nearby enemy once every 3 seconds. Then in addition to that, 15% chance on hit. And that's why we're spamming our Grim Scythe. That Myrinae damage bonus is also being buffed by the 6-piece. That is what takes this gem from being completely obsolete to actually really good for this build, and that's why I really hope that this interaction is not nerfed. I love builds that introduce variety that we don't otherwise see. Who would have thought that the Necromancer would find a use for Myrinae? And in addition to triggering your Myrinae with your Grim Scythe, the bonestorm itself is going to trigger it. You can just stand near enemies, and your Myrinae is going to be triggered. It's not clear exactly what the trigger rate of your bonestorm is, but it's there, and it adds to the damage. And it's just really fun and cool and awesome to see these, bam, these smites from above come down, zap your enemies. It's a cool build, it's a fun build, it is unique, and I really hope that this next patch won't nerf this build into oblivion. And that's gonna wrap up this guide. As a reminder, folks, as we get closer to the release of the Necromancer, if this build is still viable, if it has not been nerfed, I'll release a full guide going over all the specifics, everything that you want on your gear, as well as odds are this build still has to be perfected, so we're gonna see some changes here and there. Just fingers crossed that this build still will exist. Leave a comment with your thoughts. What do you think of this bonestorm build? Thanks for watching. Special thanks to my Twitch and Patreon supporters for making these videos possible. If you enjoyed this video, please share it, check out these other videos, and subscribe to join Rhykkers Raiders for more Diablo content.